Okay, this is the second video, my commentary, my thoughts on the magic pill. And I have to say, to start with, I despaired of doing this. I was gonna do this second video, and I thought, oh, who's listening? Well, like the 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 critique at the core of the magic pill is so revolutionary. It's a whole different way of seeing the world. And it happens to be one that I understand. I think I get the magic pill. I mean, you can bring all the threads together. Like there are all these different threads in the magic pill, but they all come back to one core, to one central argument or critique of civilization, of the way we live and the way we see things. And really, that is, I think, what I see, as I said in the first part of this commentary, is it's a critique of the notion that humans are separate from nature. And once you imagine that you're separate from nature, uh, if you if you fight against nature, you're doomed. Because you're the best scenario is that you're going to destroy yourself. So I'm going to pick up those thoughts here. Um, uh, when when I was a kid, I used to love gardening, um, and I used to also love going outdoors, canoeing and hiking and all that stuff. And I thought I mean, I talk about when I was a kid, but also, right, in my youth, right, always. And now I'm starting to realize that I had separated because I was very observant when I went on my canoe trips, on my hiking trips, and I would understand, I would observe nature. I would see what trees grew, how they grew, where they grew, plants, insects, animals. I made a layman's study of these things. Loved it. And then when I would come back home, I would like to garden. But or when I was young, I would go and visit friends' farms and family farms in the countryside. And in both those areas, in both that is in the farms and in my garden, family gardens, or my own later on, I didn't apply anything I learned. It was as if I had compartmentalized nature that I was observing and dealing with, uh, growing things in a garden. As if the same rules don't apply in the gardens and in the conventional farming. The idea was, what did we do? Um, we separated plants, for instance, and made sure we turned the soil in the gardens and tilled the fields for monocrops in the countryside. The idea was that you aerated, you let air get in. That was what I thought. Well, I was letting air into the soil, and the plants would like air. That's what I thought. Um, and then you wanted to separate plants because you assumed that plants were all in competition with each other. These were very scarce resources. They wanted the minerals in the water, and so you planted plants separate, and you make sure you don't plant them too tight together. You have to separate them so that they have enough to sustain them. And then of course, you couldn't let anything grow. You couldn't let ground cover grow, and you certainly wouldn't let leaves. You certainly wouldn't leave leaves in a garden, and you wouldn't let ground cover remain on a field at the farm in a monocrop. You saw bare earth. You saw the soil in a garden. We thought, people would say, "Oh, isn't that lovely? Look at the dark soil. Isn't that a beautiful garden?" That's what we thought. That's what I thought. Everyone was doing it. Get those leaves out of there. Clean up the garden. You don't want to have any leaves covering the garden, or mulch any of any kind. Um, and then of course we had to add fertilizers. You're supposed to know that you have. Oh, there are only three things. If, uh, what, potassium, calcium, Oh God, what did we add? Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. You have to know what to add if you're a good gardener, you know. But none of the other. We didn't think about all of the other elements that the plant might need. We were ignorant about it. Um, oh, I could go on, but look, that's a critique of where that's how I saw things. And you know, at the same time, don't forget, I saw forests, I saw fields in the wild, and I thought, and they were nothing like that. They were full of diversity, and they were full of insects and bugs and things that were going to bite you, and things that you thought were beautiful, butterflies and moths and horseflies and deer flies and mosquitoes and frogs and on and on and on. Of course, go back to the garden. And you know, if a butterfly landed on your garden, that was nice. Um, but you know, you didn't want too many insects, so you sprayed them to keep the insects away. Okay, enough of that. Now, a few years ago, I saw a film by a British filmmaker, Rebecca Hosking, and it was a great documentary. It was one of those uh, documentaries that changed my way of seeing things. Just like that, I thought, oh, I know what she's doing. So she was going to inherit her family farm. Her father, who's aging and her could no longer keep up the farm, seemed to be in his 70s, and so she would inherit it. But she was aware that conventional farming methods used were very heavily dependent on petrol, oil. And now she did this in the context, she began the questioning in the context of peak oil. Okay, if there isn't going to be any, you know, if petroleum is going to run out, where will that lead us? And she didn't want to be investing all her time and energy in a practice that was doomed. So and besides, when she looked at the farm, you know, her father and her uncle also was helping her father with the farm, both aged. They didn't seem happy, I have to say. You know, working on the farm was trudgery, long days. They didn't want to carry on anymore. They were happy to get out of it. And she didn't want that life either. So she goes around the British Isles and she finds people who are practicing permaculture. That is, they're applying the principles of permaculture. Uh, Especially, I want to mention. Well, they were all really interesting. The people that she who helped her understand what they were doing. There was Martin Crawford, who you can look up, and he's posted videos as well on YouTube. But all of a sudden she saw things completely differently, and she, you know, her whole understanding of what agriculture was and what our modern society was changed, and was thrown on its head. Because what she was seeing was people who were doing exactly what I was describing earlier. They were applying the principles of nature to gardening or to cultivation, to farming. And it was a completely different way of doing things. Um, First of all, you never till. You know, you nature fills in any gap, and we all know that. If there's a you know, a clearing, a spot where the soil is bare, something comes and fills it in right away. When I take my dog, every morning over to the field to play, I notice, like, we go to this field, we play, I exercise, he plays, um, and you take any, like, square foot of the field. I mean, I've been doing this lately, and you can identify so many species all growing together, clover and grasses and tansy and uh, well, on and on. That's just how this abandoned field works, and everything's healthy. You know, burdock. There's burdock right next to tansy, and they're both going down and spreading their roots. Um, Now, let's see. Oh, So she goes to these permaculture operations. And first of all, the people are full of life. They love what they're doing. They don't work like farmers, conventional farmers work, we have long days, we're up at 4, we work 12-hour days, and it's hard work what we do. No, these people are like, our work is observing what nature does and just directing it. Um, and not only are they actually, if you just, are they harvesting the same or more calories on a certain size of land as monoculture does, but it's far more important than that. They're not leaving waste behind. I mean, leaving death and destruction behind them, which is conventional farming with all the fertilizers and pest and biocides, and any monoculture. This is an idea of letting things grow. It's fascinating. And so she brings her camera, and she's really good. She's really good filmmaker. She shows all the life, the birds and the bees and the insects and the worms and all the diversity of plants in a field that is tended as nature intended. Uh, and right next to it, you'll see a monocrop, death, nothing. The birds, seagulls don't even go anymore because there's no worms there. It's been tilled. All the life in the soil is dead. It's not even. There's no point in the birds even going and picking off the worms. The first year you turn the soil, birds will come in and eat everything that's thrown up that's thrown above ground. After that, the soil is so dead. There's no point in even coming anymore. That's when you see that conventional farming methods, tilling has destroyed the field because the uh, seagulls don't come anymore. So um, anyway, so that was really the first in my mind. That was the thing that really flipped me over to to seeing things differently and to allowing myself to use what I was learning when I would go into the wild and to apply that to what I was doing in my backyard. So what I did was I started a project a couple of years ago of transforming a a parking place in my backyard. 'Cause we have small little yards here in Montreal. It's on the plateau. It's the highest density, the borough with the highest density population in Canada. There's small little yards and duplexes and triplexes. So I decided to take this parking place I had and transform it into a garden based on these principles. So it's all exploration, which is great. If I make mistakes, well, what mistakes can you make? It's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. You just learn, right? It's all learning. So all of this motivated me to build a garden in the backyard. So here, I transformed this parking place, which was just compacted dirt where not even a weed would grow, into a garden. I started that a year and a half ago in the fall of 2016. I built an active compost pile, which means I collected just leaves and um, uh, kitchen scraps and piled them 4.5 feet high and 5.5 feet in diameter. And over the course of the fall, it it really started to decompose, and already it was really interesting to see that just to be able to create the conditions that life should in which life can propagate, can develop. And so I turned the pile, and so what I was seeing was this heat that was coming out of the compost pile was a sign of the bacteria that were present because I put some soil in there from the forest gardens on the mountain, thinking that may get some gets a variety of bacterial life. In any case, they they propagated with this food, that is the kitchen scraps and the carbon from the leaves. So much so that I had to turn it about 5 times in the fall, and it overwintered. I turned it in the spring, and you know, each time I turned it, there were all kinds of invisible life. That is the bacteria that were there, that you knew were there because of of the um, the heat, and other single celled animals, uh, organisms, as well as things that you could see, sow bugs and springtails, and you know, at a certain point along the edges there were worms, uh, and this carried on right into the spring. And in fact, in the spring there were lots of worm eggs as well. So in the spring, I built a um, I built the form for the garden, which I used for which I used young branches from trees and bushes that are very pliable, you know, when they're green in the spring. Um, just wove them around some pickets that I hammered into the ground. That wasn't easy, hammering the pickets into the ground, because it was so compacted. But in any case, I did that. And now that you know, it took a while over the course of the last summer, summer of 2017, the wood dried, and the uh, the garden wall, which in fact gave me the raised bed, you know, just solidified into place. So then I took I just spread out the compost and planted directly into it. The idea is that what I'm hoping is, and this is all an experiment, we'll see what happens. So far, it's been great. The idea is that certain plants that I put in there, like the comfrey, burdock, uh, there's rhubarb, grapes. These are plants with deep roots that I'm hoping will be able to pierce the uh, the compacted zone, and introduce life into that zone and create soil out of it. So what is soil? Soil is, for me, I mean, that's a term that I think is misapplied a lot. But for me, soil has to be in place. It is earth with, or sand, silt, and clay with life in it. So you can't buy a bag of soil. You can buy a bag of earth. But once you put that earth down on the in the garden, it can then become soil over time, as the roots and the microorganisms work on it to create structure, to create aggregates, and uh, and then you have to. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but this is uh, soil. This is and the healthier the soil, that is, the more biology that you can create in the soil, the healthier the garden. That means a greater biodiversity, and that biodiversity creates, or is the foundation for the biodiversity above ground and below ground. And that includes us in that biodiversity. So as I say, I had always just thought of gardens in terms of what you see above ground. You know, the final product, the product that you eat, or the flower that you enjoy. But focusing on the soil has transformed my view of what gardening or farming and farming could be. So so I'll try to discuss what I've learned. Uh, Soil is al is alive with life, and it works like this. In general terms, plants transform sunlight with sunlight, with photons from the sun. Plants can transform carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water into sugars and carbohydrates and starches that they use to grow, and that they exude into the ground, into the soil. And when they do that, they attract and they feed bacteria. those bacteria multiply in the same way that they multiplied in my compost heap. And the bacteria are eaten by single-celled um, organisms, protozoa and arthropods, nematodes, that, having eaten the bacteria, poop out different elements, molecules, that are then taken up by mycorrhizal fungi that attach themselves to the roots, pierce the roots, and feed back to the plant exactly what the plant needed in order to grow, in order to repel insects, in order to protect itself. So elements in the soil, a whole range of elements, potassium, zinc, nitrogen, calcium, all these things are fed to the plant in this way. Now, the one thing to take notice of here, and here again to understand the food web and how plants are part of it. Plants attract the bacteria that they want to attract by releasing certain types of sugars or carbohydrates into the soil. They know what they're doing because different bacteria will be eaten by different protozoa or arthropods, and they will produce different molecules or different elements that the plant needs. The plant knows what it needs in order to, say, protect itself from an insect that's going to eat its leaves. Plants attract bacteria. The bacteria feed on what the plant has to offer them, because only the plant can, through photosynthesis, has the ability through photosynthesis to make sugars and starches and carbohydrates in the first place. It attracts those bacteria so that they will be eaten. In other words, it's the very beginning. The plant is the very first step of a complex system of predation and symbiosis. Predators, prey, and symbiosis. The species are living and feeding themselves and multiplying, although individuals are sacrificed. And that's how this system works. So no one, not even plants, are excluded from the predator-prey relationships. This whole food web. So this is, as I see this is the plant has a kind of evolutionary consciousness. It knows what it needs, and it knows what bacteria it needs to attract in order to protect itself or to grow. So we're all part of this. We're all part of this food web. And so what was fascinating about this, and here's the first year of the garden. People told me, you can't plant in compost, and that's just dirt underneath. What does it cost you? It cost me nothing in money, and it cost me only in time. However, by the end of the season, that was last summer, the garden was just full of life, and not only all kinds of species that I had introduced. Some lived, some didn't, and in fact some I ejected. Let's just think about, for instance, there was a lot of mustard garlic growing in the neighborhood. It's all over the place, of course, but it's very nutritious. It's edible, and I had put some in the garden until I realized that it actually exudes an element into it's an invasive species, but in the true sense, it exudes something through its roots, that a molecule that actually kills off mycorrhizal fungi, which I need, which is absolutely imperative in order to get the whole network going. And so that's why mustard garlic lives in it creates its own monocultures for even decades until it stops releasing that stuff. But other plants can't live with it as long as it's destroying a part of the food web that's necessary. That is fungi that feed plants, uh, that feed molecules back into plants. So I decided that mustard garlic would have to go. Um, so that's me, playing the director of this orchestra of the food web of the garden. Um, but the most amazing thing and the thing that were that allows me to understand the enthusiasm of other people who are working in this same way, whether they call themselves regenerative agriculture, permaculture, perennial polyculture. There are different ways you can call it. You can name what we're doing. But the idea is that you create the conditions in which life returns. And in fact, I've got life now in what was the beginning of a garden. I mean, it's a garden that's very functioning, that functions. But I'm hoping to create real healthy soil, full of life, in what was a sterile, lifeless parking lot. Um, and I had to overcome certain reflexes. For instance, I planted tansy roots. They grew beautifully, um, and I have a couple of clumps of tansy that I got from an abandoned field that was going to be excavated. It's already been excavated now to build condos. But as my tansy grew, I saw in the spring there were signs of a spittlebug. You know that little foam you see sometimes on plants. Well, it's a spittlebug, and a spittlebug takes the sap out of a stalk of a plant, and it whips it up into a froth, and it plants its eggs in there. And when the eggs hatch, the that froth protects the eggs. That's kind of its little home, and it also is food for the tiny little nymph until it grows up. And my first reflexes when I saw this was as if it didn't belong there, and I killed the first one I saw. And then I thought, oh, what are you doing? By the way, a spittlebug is amazing. It can hop 100 times its length, 100 times its length. And so I squished this thing, and I regretted it. And then there were more and more of them came, and I came to leave them alone. And so they're part of the food web. I never really noticed them anymore. They probably preyed on some things and were preyed upon by other things. But in fact, last summer, I didn't have any problems with bugs eating my garden in its first year. And so here we are now in the second year of the garden, and things are coming up over the perennials are coming back up. So here's a couple of things to notice is that you can the enthusiasm comes from knowing that you can reintroduce life, that you can create the conditions for life to flourish, and it's not only edible, but the healthier the soil, the more nutritious the food that you're going to grow in it. And I grew things to feed everyone, to feed butterflies, so that there would be pollen for bees, ants. Everything's welcome. And the principle that I hope, I mean, what I'm looking for is to see that the garden organizes itself, that a food web creates itself, and okay, so that is my little experiment. But I'm going to pick up the issue in the next video, part 3, on the very issue of putting carbon, because what we're doing now is this life in the soil is capturing carbon from the atmosphere and putting it in the soil. This is a little experiment that I'm doing, but the repercussions are enormous for the planet. So I'm going to pick that up in the next video. That'll be number 3. So I'll call my garden perennial polyculture, regenerative polyculture. We could use a number of terms. The idea is, and the principles that I'm following are to let the soil, are to pay attention to the soil, to let the soil um, uh, diversify the microbiology as much as possible. That means letting a polyculture of plants grow, many different species of plants, as close as in as close proximity as they want to grow, um, and um, to develop the diversity above ground and below. So the soil is key. Develop the soil, capture the carbon, put it in the soil, turn it into life. Turn carbon dioxide into life that's held in the soil ultimately, and it's actually held in living beings like humans and all living beings based on carbon. So now we've remember that for the next video. But what is the model that I'm escaping from, that I'm liberating myself from? It's one where, as the gardening industry, the agricultural industry, it's one where we traumatize the land. We we take everything off it. We expose the soil, which which nature never allows. And then we try to grow monocultures, or we try to enforce a vision on top of for a garden. We insist that a certain plant grow there because we like it's pretty. In other words, we traumatize nature, and then someone is there to offer you solutions at a price. The solutions will never work, and it'll be a constant war against nature because you'll need fertilizers now because you're not capturing your plants are not able to capture all of the elements in the soil, not just the three elements that they'll sell you in the gardening store, but all of the elements. There could be 50 elements. I think they're up to finding more now that plants require for all of the processes that they need to survive and to protect themselves. The microbiology knows how to get to extract those elements out of the soil if you let it. That's what nature does. But once we've traumatized it, you need then to start adding things, and you need to start adding, and then the plants are vulnerable. So insects come. Well, they'll sell you an insecticide. You have a fungus. Oh, well, they have a fungicide for that. Uh, and uh, and you know, and so on and so on. So this is a model that's profitable as long as people continue to work against nature, to be at war with nature. And this in the farming industry, this is obvious, and there are a lot of critics of the system. You can look at a big rancher, a big farmer like Gabe Brown or Joel Salatin, who discuss how they've escaped all of this on big operations, this dependency on people who want to sell them things. And these are the big corporations like, uh, well, Monsanto is an obvious example. It stands out, but this is the chemical agriculture, and I call it conventional agriculture, as opposed to, I mean, I'm saying the problem starts with monocultures of annuals. Um, but this model is the same that we've talked about now for gardening, is the same that we'll see in medicine, in veterinary medicine, and really all over. How do you make people dependent? How do you make people sick so that then you offer them a solution? In other words, if you, if your source of income is healing healing a problem that is really downstream from the original problem. That is, you don't go to the source, but you just heal the sickness, that one sickness. You stay in business for a long time. And this is a model that's all over our economy, all over our society that we've accepted. Make make a problem and then spend the rest of your life not addressing it, addressing only the symptoms. And you're not healthy, the system's not healthy, the soil's not healthy, and we're headed towards catastrophe. So that is my experience of the garden, and how the experience of my garden leads me to a very a larger critique, a very broad critique of our society as a whole.